Hi, have you wondered how to achieve a flawless finish when seaming your makes? If you have, keep watching this 15-minute tutorial and I'll show you how. Okay, so we're going to talk about the ladder stitch today. And you might be wondering, well, why do I even need to know what the ladder stitch is? What does it do? And I'm going to explain to you what it does. If you look here, we have one of the project bags that I showed off on my last podcast. You can see the seams on the outside are nice and closed. Very neat, no visible stitches. But the nature of sewing something like this is that you have to turn it out. And therefore you need to leave an open seam. And once that seam, you've turned it out, you then have to close the seam up. Now, what you could do is this. You could pinch the seam together and use your machine to stitch across. There's nothing wrong with that, but it does leave you with visible stitches, where on all the other seams you don't have them, unless it's something deliberate like here where we've top stitched. And it just isn't quite that flawless finish. The ladder stitch enables us to have that. So what we're going to do is we're going to work today on this project bag, which as you can see is finished, apart from this open seam here. You can clearly see where the stitching finishes from the machine at either end. And this is where the ladder stitch will come in really useful. We're going to start first of all by threading our needle, and I want you to do this in a specific way. Okay, so we're going to start rather bizarrely by threading a needle. Now, I have my needle. It has a nice big eye, so you should hopefully all see. And I have my thread. Now what I've done, if you can see here, is I have folded the thread in half. And the reason for this is it helps us control those ends. So you can see I've got two ends here and a loop at the end. Now how I'm going to thread this needle, so I'm going to put it behind the thread. I'm going to fold the thread over the needle and pinch. That's pinched there. Now still pinching, I'm going to slide the thread off the needle, still pinching. Now I'm turning the needle around so I have the eye over the thread, and I'm going to push it down over the thread. And as you can see, that has drawn both ends through my needle. So as you can see, I've given it a little press here, and the sides want to come together nicely now, like so. You don't need to pin this. You might find it easier, but we're essentially just turning the sides together so the seams are now joined. Okay, and that's what it's going to look like roughly when it's finished. Okay, so now we've got our threaded needle, we're going to make our first stitch. And why I got you to do this loop will become clear. We're going to insert our needle where the last machine stitch was. You see here. So we're going to insert it. I'm actually going to insert it on this side. Now, you can see I'm drawing the thread through. As I draw it through, here comes the loop. I'm going to put my needle through that loop and finish drawing through. This means that we don't have any annoying tails to weave in afterwards. We can just focus on the one tail at the other end. Now the thing to remember about ladder stitch is that it is effectively like a ladder. If these two sides here are the legs of the ladder, the stitches we're making are going to become the rungs and go across. So we've made our first stitch. We're going to go across directly to the other side of the ladder and put our needle in. And for simplicity's sake, I'm putting it in where the machine stitch was. Now, the way in which you bring your needle out is really important. You are going to be moving your needle up the leg of the ladder now. So effectively, you've gone in and you've turned around and come out at a right angle. Now, I've not gone very far at all. That is just a few millimeters for this first stitch. I'm going to draw my needle through, and you can see that that brings those two sides together. Now, I'm not particularly happy with this because you can see that first stitch, but it will become neater as we go. So we've got these two pressed sides, and you can see where that needle wants to go next. We are going to go directly across to the opposite side where that rung would go straight. So effectively where my needle is going, it's following the path from the first stitch to that stitch. And then we're going to turn the needle so it is going to come out a little bit further up that crease that we folded before at a right angle, and we're going to draw our needle through. Okay. Now that's become a bit pinched. If that happens, that just tells you you've gone a bit too far or you're not quite at a right angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unthread my needle, pull it back through. I'm going to give myself the luxury of doing that stitch again. It's hard to do when you're looking through a camera rather than looking at the needlework itself. See, my hand's now in the way because I'm looking at threading the needle. Okay, now the needle won't thread. So these tutorials are run with a similar level of professionalism to the podcasts. If you haven't checked out the podcasts yet, do have a look on the channel and see what nonsense I get up to there. Right. Okay, so I've got my seam folded in. I know where my seam's going to go. It's there. And I'm going to go directly across. Can you see that? I'm going to go directly across to put my needle in. In it goes. And if you look, I'm actually going in at a right angle. I'm going in along the line of that seam. And I'm just going to draw my needle through now. There we are. Now we don't have any of that nasty crinkling. What we do have is the two sides pulled together with no sign of that stitch I've just done, and that's what we want. So now we're going to repeat the process. We've come up this side, we've gone across, and now I've come out at a right angle. What I'm going to do is pop my needle directly across, and remember it's going at a right angle. So I've popped it in directly across and I'm turning to come out a little bit further up. Okay. Draw it through and that tucks that seam in nicely there. Now I'm going directly across in the other way, so my needle will go in at a right angle and my needle will go up the ladder at the leg of the work, the leg of the ladder. You see? Directly across and up a little way and draw through. And that is the ladder stitch. Essentially, you just need to repeat that process and I will show you what to do when we get to the other end. All right, I'll see you there in a minute. Now I just want to draw your attention to the last stitch, one of the last stitches I completed, and that's this one here. And if you look really closely, you might just about be able to see the stitch. The reason for that is I came too far up when I put my needle in. And I'll show you what I mean here. I find my needle. Okay, so you've got your folded seam. Now mine is coming unfolded. Did a great job of pressing that. Right, you've got your folded seam, so you can tell what you want it to look like. And what you need to do is you don't want to come in at the very top of the seam, at the very top of the fold. You actually want to come in a little bit below that, just a few threads below, okay? Because it will still do the effect of pulling in, and you will still have the same seam allowance because it's pinned in place, but it will hide that stitch. Does it want to focus? There we are. So I've just come, if you can see, there's the top of the fold, and I've just come a few threads down. And if I pull now, that should show you what I mean. Do you see it's tucked in? I mean, you can still see the stitch because I haven't completed the next bit of the ladder, but it is tucked in below. If I pull that torch, you can't see it anymore. Do you see? Okay, so let's continue. Now I know this obviously means it's going to take a long time, but it really is worth it for that finish. You don't want to rush this and end up with a finish you're not proud of. Particularly if you're making something to sell or to gift. You want people to know you've really put that time and effort into what you've made. The temptation can be to put loads through just to get it done quicker, but it really is worth putting that time in. Look how neat that's looking now. Beautiful. Okay, you can see now I've come to the end. I've got these couple of machine stitches here that you can just about see. So I'm going to go over those machine stitches. I'm going to go past it just to make sure this is really secure. Right, so that is pretty much invisible. Got some, the reason you can see these holes here is because I've deliberately used quite a thick needle for the purposes of the tutorial. I'd recommend using something a little bit thinner when you're doing this yourself. But you can see I've closed up that seam there. So now all that remains is to deal with this tail. I've come out this side. I'm going to go back in and come out almost in exactly the same spot. And then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go in but through to the opposite side this time and come out almost at the same spot, just to make sure that that's nice and secure. Now what do you do with this end? It could be a real pain to weave in. What you do, if I turn my work, so this is the end we've just closed here. I am going to put my needle through the seam and I am going to push it quite a way down and pull it out again a little bit further on. Now you'll notice I've kind of come out in the middle here. This doesn't actually matter all that much because what I'm going to do is draw through and then I'm going to pull really tight so all this fabric's cinched up, and here's our thread coming out. I'm going to pull it nice and tight, snip quite close to the base, and then when I pull it out again, that thread has completely disappeared. This thread is a rogue thread from the other seam, so we'll just snip that one off. There we go. And there you have it. There is your ladder stitch. You can see it's quite a neat seam and isn't too different to the seams we've got here. Much nicer, I think anyway, than this machine stitched seam. So there you have it. That's the ladder stitch. I hope you found that useful. If you have found it useful, please, if you consider hitting the like button below, and if you would consider subscribing to the channel if you like the tutorials and the podcast, then that would be amazing also. All right, happy crafting. Take care. Bye.